And now we come to our partner country, Vietnam. And I'm very pleased that we have again been able to win a spokesman from GTAI who will give us an introduction to the country. He shines not only through his experience, but also through his multifaceted biography. Peter Buerstedde from Germany studied economics and politics in the UK and Russia before joining Germany Trade and Invest in 2001. After postings in Belgrade, Caracas, Mexico City and Paris, he moved to Hanoi in August 2022. As Director Vietnam of the GTAI office in Hanoi, he joins us live from Vietnam and reports on the Vietnamese economy and on opportunities for German companies. A warm welcome now to Peter Buerstedde. You will hear an introduction on the topic Vietnam, Southeast Asia's industrial powerhouse. Welcome, Peter Buerstedde. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Good morning, Halle. Actually, it is the afternoon. I'm calling in from Saigon today. I'm normally based in Hanoi in the north of the country, but I'm on a business trip to the south. Just a word on Germany Trade and Invest. Maybe we are the trade and investment promotion agency of the German federal government. And my role in Vietnam principally is to report on different economic sectors and identify opportunities for German companies. And I'm very honored to be invited to speak to this very important Congress. And I will give a short overview of the economic development of Vietnam, looking a few years back and looking towards the future, and also at the present, because there are some interesting developments happening here at the moment, which shine a particular light on some of the challenges the country faces. Let me first of all say that Vietnam's economic development has been an impressive success story over the last decades. Vietnam has shown a consistent growth rate of around 6.5% per year on average in the last 30 years, going up to the corona crisis. And this has meant just in the last 10 years that the poverty rate, which 2010 it stood at 17%, today has fallen to around 5%. The middle class at the same time has grown from around 10% in 2010 to 40% today. I hope you can still hear me. I think my image was cut because maybe the connection is not very stable. I can see you very well. I hope you can hear me very well as well. And that's the development just in the last 10 years. During the corona crisis, some of you will remember that Vietnam was held up as an example on how to deal with the corona crisis. It closed its borders very effectively and very quickly in 2020, and thus prevented a first wave of infections in the country. It kept its economy running and reached a very respectable 2.9% growth rate in 2020. 2021, what the country then failed to do very quickly was to vaccinate its population, hoping to develop a vaccine on its own. Actually, there was like a program to develop a vaccine also, which implied some German companies actually. But that effort proved futile in the end. But Vietnam very pragmatically changed course in the early months of 2021 and started to very actively vaccinate the whole population. It also received vaccines donated by Germany, among other countries, and it still couldn't prevent the sectors of the economy then having to go into lockdown in the third quarter, which meant that the growth rate was much lower in 2021, reaching still quite respectable 2.6%. Going into 2022, we saw a very strong recovery with an 8% growth rate. And the factors underpinning this strong growth performance over the last decades in Vietnam are still in place. And first of all, those are Vietnam is still lagging in some sense behind its regional peers. Vietnam's conversion to capitalism and free markets is a relatively recent phenomenon. We generally date it to the Doi Moi reforms. That was the time when the Communist Party in Vietnam made its turnaround and opened up and changed its policy to free market policies. But actually, a stronger and more rapid development of the economy only set in around the millennium. 2001, we had an economic agreement with the US coming into force. 2007, Vietnam joined the World Trade Organization and then followed the rules of the World Trade Organization, which led to a large influx of foreign companies into Vietnam. And so the country still has some catching up to do. With just above $4,000 per capita GDP, we're looking at about half of Thailand and about 1/3 of the level of Malaysia or China. So, and urbanization rates are quite low still. We're looking at about 40% in Vietnam, over 60% in Malaysia, for example, over 70% in China. So there's a lot of extensive growth still to be had in Vietnam. Secondly, investors are still coming into the country. So Vietnam has seen a wave of electronics companies coming into the country in the last couple of years, a very strong influx. That means that today electronics are about 40% of exports are electronic products. Samsung produces in Vietnam about 50% of its mobile phone worldwide production. And Samsung itself, as a company, stands for 20% of Vietnam's exports. So the electronic sector is really key, the key export sector for Vietnam. But Vietnam, just to remind you, Vietnam is number 2 for textiles worldwide as an exporting country, number 2 for coffee, number 2 also for shoes. Adidas, Nike produces 50% of its shoes here. Adidas 60% of its shoes. So it's a extremely important location also for those sectors. And so the investment location in Vietnam is still very attractive. Still, it figures some of the lowest costs in the region. It has a reasonable infrastructure development. It has a great network of free trade agreements, probably the best, the most closely knit, together with Singapore. Together with Singapore, it's the only country in the larger Southeast Asian region which has a free trade agreement with the European Union, which is key for German companies investing and sourcing from Vietnam. So the incentives and the investment conditions are still very, very good. Plus, there are all these push factors which are still in place. So we have the trade conflict between the US and China. Just to give you a figure for the wider region, what that has meant. If we look at US imports and the development from 2018 to now, China has lost about 4 percentage points of the import volume of the US. And who are the great benefactors? So Vietnam has gained 2 percentage points, and India and Thailand have each gained a 0.5 percentage point in the region. So it's clear that Vietnam has been the great benefactor of this China plus one movement, which is happening. Of course, this also is very, very valid for German companies. The calls for diversification in Germany are very strong. So many companies are looking at Vietnam. We've recently seen factories by Wisman, by Magnetec, by Schaeffler, and by Tesa, for example, opening up factories in Vietnam recently, and these are very, very important investments. And let me go to the third point. So we have the consumption market. Basically, as I said before, the middle class has grown to around 40% today. There are estimates that it will grow to 70% in 2030. So we're looking at a very strongly developing consumer market. And this is very important also for German companies in Vietnam, as German brands like Bosch, Hefele, Grohe, for example, they are the non plus ultra of a middle class household. You have to have a kitchen which has Bosch and that sort of equipment, and so German brands are extremely well regarded in Vietnam. So I think that the country, of course, has an overarching objective, which is to become an industrial country in 2045. That's the official policy. And the World Bank has an estimate of how much the country has to grow per year, which is 6.7% until 2045. And this is a formidable challenge. But given its sort of its recent development, one can understand that the government is very hopeful to reach these goals. But there have been some recent developments which I like to sort of highlight also in this brief presentation, that sort of overshadow this growth scenario. And there are two challenges which I see, which I think are quite interesting. It's, first of all, we have seen since the second quarter of 2022 that Vietnam is witnessing considerably lower growth rates due to a demand shortfall in Western markets. So if we want to simplify Vietnam's economy, export economy especially, is that Vietnam imports most of the parts from China to produce electronics, furniture, textiles, shoes, and those go to the US and Europe. And due to the Russian aggression against the Ukraine, we've seen inflation go through the roof, of course, in Western Europe and in the US. Demand, consequentially, demand falling and hurting Vietnam quite considerably. So we're looking at 3% growth in the first quarter, and the growth objective of the economy of the country for 2023 being 6.5% being out of reach. And here we see like the opposite side of diversification. So we have, of course, the diversification discussion in Europe. We have to diversify away from China. We have to go to Vietnam, for example. But of course, Vietnam also has to diversify beyond shoes, textiles, electronics, to become an industrial country. So I think that's very beautifully shown by that recent development. And if we look at even more recent developments, I don't know if you followed in the press, if it has been reported in Germany at all, that we have faced some considerable blackouts in the last couple of weeks, and which we haven't seen before, actually. I've talked to a lot of German companies, and blackouts have not really been an issue in Vietnam in the last couple of years. And those are basically caused by a long spell of dry weather reaching back several months, which have caused the dams of hydroelectric power stations to be at a record low. 11 hydroelectric stations have been shut down, which basically supply the North's electricity supply. And so we have seen blackouts, which at the same time we've had a heat wave due to the El Nino weather phenomenon. So that's been impacting Vietnam quite harshly this year. We've had temperatures of above 40% in Hanoi, where I live, which is quite extreme. And so people are turning on their ACs. The growing middle class has more air conditioning equipment also installed. So we're looking at a growing demand while the supply is not kept up. And so we've seen these blackouts. And basically what I want to say with that is also that the second big challenge for the country is, of course, climate change. And Vietnam is one of the countries that is most harshly affected by this or threatened by climate change in many ways. It's a very long coastline, very low-lying areas which are of strategic importance for the country. The two main metropolises, Saigon in the south, where I am based at the moment, where I'm here at the moment, and Hanoi in the north. The industrial parks are low-lying, as are the hotel tourist infrastructure. So Vietnam faces formidable challenges in adapting to climate change, and then also it has pledged very, very generously to be climate neutral by 2050, which many countries in the region have not. Looking at China, it's 2060 climate neutrality. So Vietnam is very ambitious in that, and this will also need massive investments. So these are some quite interesting challenges at the same time as Vietnam wanting to become an industrialized country, an industrial country, which means a much higher income on average. So we're looking at these two challenges. But let me finish on a more positive note that in these two sectors, of course, these challenges that Vietnam faces, Vietnam is not alone in those. Of course, we in Germany face the same challenges. And of course, these challenges in that sense offer many opportunities for German and Vietnamese companies partnering and finding common solutions to these issues. And just to finish this, the Vietnamese government has very recently published its power development plan, which many German investors have also been waiting for. So there's German investors wanting to develop wind parks and other renewable projects in Vietnam. And they are now seeing that the Vietnamese government is very serious about this, and they are ready to invest. And on the other side, if we look at the industrialization, the further development of the Vietnamese economy, as I speak to you now, a few hundred meters away from here, there is the German tool-making association, VDW, die Werkzeugmaschinenbauer. They are having a congress here in Vietnam to showcase German technology. And of course, there's great interest. There seem to be 150 Vietnamese companies present who want to see German technology, which they can use to then further develop their industry. So there are many opportunities to partner. And thank you very much for having me. Thank you for your attention. I hope some of that could be transmitted. I'm not sure how good the connection quality was in the end.
It was perfect.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Well, have a great Congress.
Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you very much for the insights into the Vietnamese market. Peter Buerstedde from GTAI Hanoi. Goodbye.